Hello, it is I, killer of joy. Designer of video games. And here we're going to talk about behavioral questions. I promised last time that I was going to do game design tests, but that's actually kind of a dumb topic. Important, I'll get back around to it later, but the topic that I want to talk about today is behavioral questions. How to get a job in game design, specifically how to handle behavioral questions part of the interview. And that's going to take a lot of time, so let's just go right into it. So the design interview, pretty much any interview these days, is broken up into two sections. There's the behavioral section, and then there's the technical competency question. The technical competency questions are related to precisely the actual work that you're going to be doing, the design work, or if you're interviewing as an engineer, engineering work, or if you're interviewing as a data analyst, then it's about your data analyst work. The behavioral questions are about your soft skills. So they typically start with, tell me about a time. Tell me about a time when you, and then something follows. They may ask about something that is completely unrelated to the actual work that you'll be doing. And it's because having strong soft skills is exactly as important as having good competencies in your core skill. And so companies hire for both. So what exactly might people ask? I could run the entire gamut, but I have a few examples here so you can get an idea. Describe a situation in which you were able to use persuasion to successfully convince someone to see things your way. Describe a time you were faced with a stressful situation that demonstrated your coping skills. Tell me about a time when you used good judgment and logic in problem solving. Tell me about a time when you set a goal and you were able to meet or achieve it. So you see, not all of these have to do with the technical work that you have to do, game design. A lot of them are how do you interact with your coworkers and that sort of thing. Now this isn't just subjective, like an interviewer feels like asking a question. These are motivated by the company's values. A lot of companies, especially, it's kind of a trendy thing for tech companies to do these days. They list their values on their website. And all of the interview questions, and in fact it also ties into promotions if you work there, are oriented around these values, the way Amazon does it. All of their interview questions drill into a particular Amazon leadership principle, is what they call them. In fact, each interviewer is assigned a leadership principle that they're responsible for gathering data from the interviewee, from the candidate. So for example, if I'm assigned bias for action, then I might ask the candidate, tell me about a time when you took quick action to resolve something because you were on a timeline, or something like that. It's less common for video game companies to do this, but there are some. For example, here are Riot's values. And it's a lot of the same stuff, If you're interviewing at a company that has values, then you should 100% definitely read their values, understand them. It's not just motivational posters on a wall. It's not just Kool-Aid that you drink when you get to that company. These things matter to the interviews. You should take them seriously and learn them. And you can use them to help yourself prepare for these interviews. They're basically giving you the answers to the test. Before the test, if they put their values on their website, they're telling you exactly what they want to see. Many companies don't have values on their website, did not prepare values, but in that case, you can still get a leg up by going to, a bunch of other company websites and looking at their values and using that to prepare, because you will still get behavioral questions whether or not the company has values on their website. Actually, here's a secret. It doesn't happen that much these days, but if a company does not ask you behavioral questions at all, that means any asshole can get a job there, and you probably don't want to work with a bunch of assholes. Anyway, so the way that I personally prepare for these is I'm terrible with coming up with examples. They ask you to tell a story, and I'll be like, what do I even do? I don't remember anything that I've done if you just ask me to do it on the spot. So I prepare all my stories ahead of time. I think about all the work experiences that I've had. I go down these lists and I say, think big was one of the Amazon leadership principles. What are some times when I think big, when I thought big, and then also you're going to get the opposite question too. What are some times that you failed to think big? And so come up with examples for each. And I think about all these stories ahead of time, and then I just write a big list of stories with me. And then I have, then practice your stories ahead of time if you want to do that. I tend to just, wing it. But anything you want to do. I've never heard an interviewer, they ask me a question and I say, excellent question. I think I have a good story for you. Let me look at my notes real quick. And then I just look at my list of stories. And I scan my stories for the most appropriate story, and that might take, 10 or 20 seconds. I've never had an interview say, no, you can't scan your notes. Stop scanning your notes. Like, it's totally okay to take a moment and just look at your notes and decide which story you want to tell. That's the most appropriate story for the situation. So let's talk about how to format your response. There's a format called STAR. Situation, task, action, response. It's really easy to memorize. Just use the STAR acronym. And so I'll give you an example. Tell me about a time when you had a problem that you had to overcome. It's like the very, very basic interview question. Well, and I'll answer this problem as a game designer. Situation. We were working on like a Grand Theft Auto game where you can drive your cars around. It's multiplayer, and we want players to fight with each other. So we have these gas stations in the game, and the gas stations are supposed to draw players because you got to refill your car for gas, but they weren't. So this is the situation we're in. I'm just giving a background story. Very short. Task. So my manager said, please solve this problem where players are not going to the gas station and fighting in this hotspot. The gas stations aren't fulfilling their design purpose. Action. What specific action did I do to resolve this problem? Did I reduce the number of gas stations, make it take longer to fill up, make the cars run out of gas faster or something? And then result is, as a result, in playtest, we observed that there were 12% more kills around gas stations or something like that. It doesn't have to be an exact number, but there just have to be some kind of concrete result that you got. And in fact, the higher level job you are looking for, the more likely you should be giving like an exact number. But it's not required. You can say something like, we never received that feedback, again, that players weren't, so we consider the problem resolved. So now what happens if the interviewer asks you a question and you don't have a story prepared? And you can't think of one on the spot. It is okay to go into your list and find a related story. It's not a 100% match, but it is a similar. It's a similar value. Like you can tell, oh, this is, to use another Amazon example, this is a dive deep question. I'm actually going to give them a different dive deep story so that interviewer can still collect data on dive deep, which is their assigned competency, behavioral competency to collect data on. Don't tell them a completely irrelevant story. It's obviously better if you can tell a story that exactly answers the question. I have had interviewees that I asked them to tell me a specific story and they can tell me something completely different, and that's just not useful for me at all. If I'm assigned the dive deep competency, then I need to get some dive deep data. It's better if you can come up with a story that exactly answers the question, but it is, in my opinion, an acceptable fallback for you to find a related question, and then let the interviewer call you out on it if they really want a story that addresses that exact question. And in a similar vein, people often ask me, can I tell the same story twice to two different interviewers? And the answer is try not to. Try not to. Most companies encourage you not to do that, discourage you from doing that. But if you have to, because you just don't have another story to tell, then what I recommend is find a different angle of that story to tell. So if one interviewer is asking you about the earns trust leadership principle, again using Amazon as an example, and another interviewer is asking you about the deliver results leadership principle, then when you're telling the story to the earns trust interviewer, focus on that part of the story. Tell this aspect of the story that you don't tell for the deliver results, because deliver results isn't as applicable to the earns trust interviewer. Two more tips before we move on. Make sure the stakes are high enough. If you are interviewing for a junior position, then the stakes should at least affect whether your work gets done, affect you personally. But if you are interviewing for a more senior position, then this should be a story that affects more people on the team, maybe up to a dozen people. If you're interviewing for a principal design job, then you're probably not watching this video, but as an example, you might be telling a story that would affect 50 to 100 people. Or alternatively, a senior story could affect a more critical part of the product, a larger feature, a more critical feature. Whereas if you're in a junior role, your story may, and it's okay that your story only affects a single and more ancillary feature. If you are interviewing for a principal design job and you tell a story with low stakes where there's not much at stake, there aren't many risks, then you aren't telling a story to the level that you need to be. You're not telling a convincing story, because as a principal you need to be making decisions that affect the entire team. That's the purpose of a principal engineer, is to have an impact across an entire team of 50, 100 people. And if you aren't telling that kind of story, then they can't see that you're doing the sort of work that they need you to do. So pick, this is more applicable to mid-level and senior applicants, pick your interview stories such that they have impact to a wider audience, that have impact to a wider team. Don't pick something that only affects you personally. And finally, don't be afraid to criticize yourself. A lot of the time, when interviewers ask for, tell me about a time when you made a mistake, it's not a trick question. They actually want to hear a time when you made a mistake. They want to hear how you handled it. They want to hear what you learned from it. The question is not to prostrate yourself and embarrass yourself because it's like some kind of stupid hazing ritual. The point of the question is, can they handle making mistakes? Do they learn from them? Do they grow? Or would they just dig in their heels and cause additional problems, which we don't want people like that on the team. So don't be afraid to tell stories that make yourself look bad, as long as you are learning from them, which will make yourself look good again. And finally, the last question that I'll ask, that I often get asked, is how much detail should I go into? How long should I go? And the thing I want you to think about is, pretend you're at a bar and it's your friend who cares about you, and they want to know. You're just telling them the story because they're interested. You probably don't want to bore your friend by going into incredible detail, but your friend is going to ask follow-up questions because they're interested. And so let your friend is the interviewer in this case, let your friend take the story, give them just enough sufficient backstory so that they can understand at a high level what's going on. And then let your friend tease the rest of the story out of you with their follow-up questions. Because a good interviewer, they're actually going to get most of their data in the follow-up questions. So let's get to those follow-up questions as fast as possible. Give them the basic structure of your story, and then let them take the follow-up questions where they want to go. And there are 4 basic follow-up questions. These are the 4 magic questions that I want you to consider for every story that you prepare. You're not always guaranteed to get these, and you might get other ones, but these are, I think, excellent things to think about during your story preparation so that you don't get caught off guard. And they are: what was the goal? What were the risks? What were the trade-offs? And what did you learn? So what was the goal? Let's go back to my example with the gas station. Well, the goal was the goal was get players to use the gas stations the way we intended. Go to the gas stations and fight other players at the gas stations. I asked this question because I want to make sure that the candidate is forming goals, and I want to make sure that the actions that they take actually accomplish those goals. This is what I was talking about in the second video. What were the risks? Well, for example, if the gas stations are hotbeds, then there may be no way to get gas without going to a gas station, and so players that don't want to engage with other players have no way of getting gas. That might be a risk. I might ask this follow-up question because I just want to see whether the candidate was aware that there were risks, was aware of what the risks are. Often, how well a candidate can explain what risks exist is a good indicator of how senior the candidate is. In general, if I can think of a really easy, risk that the candidate didn't tell me, then that might be a red flag. And if the candidate listed some risks that I hadn't thought of, kind of left field for me, then that might be a green flag. But mostly I'm just looking for, did the candidate think about the risks and understand the risks ahead of time, or are they caught off guard by the question? So what were the trade-offs? So I think I listed 3 examples back there. If you reduce the number of gas stations, then that might be effective. However, it's going to be a lot of level design work. It's a high-cost solution. If you increase the amount of time to gas up your car, then you might run into player frustration issues. Where they're blaming the game and therefore not enjoying their experience. So I ask this kind of questions because I want to see whether, kind of similar to the what were the risks, I just want to see that the candidate is thinking about the trade-offs. Did they evaluate multiple solutions, and are they aware of the pros and cons of each solution? And did they reasonably, I might not agree, I'm not going to count off for them for not picking the same thing that I would have picked, but did they at least evaluate multiple things and pick not just their favorite one, but the one that they thought maximized some kind of metric? And finally, what did you learn? This is a very personal question, but if I were to fabricate something for my example, I could say, well, we studied a lot of players and how they used gas stations and why they went to the gas station, why they didn't go to the gas station. We learned that players just don't want to fight other players. And so we ended up canceling the feature using the thing that we learned, canceling the gas station feature or whatever, Specifically, if I ask this question, I want to see that the candidate is going to do things a different way the next time. I had a friend who used to joke that next time, let's still make mistakes. We're still going to make mistakes, but let's just make different mistakes because we learned from the previous mistakes. That's basically what I want to see out of candidates. Next time, they're going to make a different mistake a better mistake to make because they learned from the mistake last time. So a good answer to this question indicates that, the next time I'm in this same situation, I'm going to take a different action, which is actually literally the definition of learning, is that you change your future behavior in response to something that happened to you in the past. So not every follow-up question in that list is going to be applicable towards every, interview story that you have to tell. The purpose of the list is to help you practice and think about your stories and prepare yourself for potential follow-ups, which are generally hard to prepare for. So that's how I want you to use the list. When you write a story, try and see whether any of these 4 questions fit, and then think about what your response would be if you get asked those questions. One last thought here before we move on to a practical example. Generally, the industry has moved to a place where interviewers tend to ask you about a specific time. They don't ask you about what you would do or what you think on a current topic, but rather they ask you, tell me a specific story in the past that has happened to you. And the reason that they take this approach is that they want to extrapolate your future from your past. Okay, this is the line of thinking. For better or for worse, this is the line of thought. They're going to look at your past and say, what did you do concretely in the future? And they're going to guess that you will continue to do that or better in the future. And so you always want to be telling a specific story. So here's a bad example. I'm going to give you the bad example. Well, if I have a problem in a video game, I might talk to other people to get some viewpoints on the problem, and then come up with a solution, and then try to engineer that solution and test it, and go to players and get feedback, and then iterate on the design. Okay, that is a perfectly reasonable response, except it's generally not as strong as telling a specific story. Here's an example of that. Well, we had a problem with the gas station feature in particular, and that players weren't responding to it. And so we came up with this mechanic to change the gas stations. This is exactly what the mechanic is. and we got this result. Sometimes you will get interviewers that do ask you less concrete questions. They're not tell me about a time questions, but they can be anything, you know, what would you do sorts of questions. And what I recommend that you do in that case is turn them into a concrete story. So the interviewer isn't perhaps well trained enough to ask you for a specific concrete question. Help them out. Give them a specific concrete answer. And then they can take that data back to their team. They only asked you for what would you do, and you told them what did you do. It's a stronger story. They're going to go to the debrief, and they're going to represent you better. Okay, I want to do a practical example. I'm going to go through, I'm going to ask myself an actual question that I've been asked and answer it the way I did during an actual interview, and I think that would be really valuable. But we're going to save it for next video because we're already running really long here, and I want to do a Q&A and wrap it up, and then we'll do that in the next video, I promise. And so let's do a Q&A session. I got a comment on an earlier video. I'm just going to read it here. I'm a freshman in college working towards figuring out the degree I want to pursue a career in game design. Do you recommend any way to get the experience needed to get a job in game design? Where would I start? And I have started trying to teach myself C#, learning Unity, any other tips for getting experience. Basically, how do I make a game? And I did touch on this some in previous videos, about the importance of having design experience in your resume and how it's difficult to make games on the side to get a job making games, like do unpaid work. But unfortunately, that's the way our industry is. You have to make games. The number one way to get a job in the industry, especially as a designer, is to have a bunch of games on your resume that you have made. That's the biggest and most important advice. It's very difficult, possibly impossible, to get a design job without having designed games built and implemented on your resume. Keep them small enough that in scope that you can reasonably finish them as one person in a few months' time, something short, but substantial enough that there's something that can come up in an interview that you can dig into, that have a little bit of teeth, you and the interviewer can talk about it. If you have not learned any programming languages, then I usually recommend Unreal Engine because it has Blueprint. It's a little bit easier to learn Blueprint than text programming language because you don't have to learn the syntax. The syntax is enforced for you with the boxes and the lines. If you have some C#, then Unity's C# solution might be more flexible. If you're already familiar with JavaScript or a web stack, then I recommend just making whatever the game idea you're trying to make in just on the web. I mean, use the tools that you already have. It's okay just to make indie games by yourself, and when you do that, make sure that they are top line on your resume. They are experienced. They're not like projects on the bottom. They're not in a sidebar. They are right there above whatever else you were doing. Is give it a name. My awesome game, and then write what you did as if it were a job, as if it were just a regular job. Don't try and represent it as a regular job, but make sure that they see it and it's not hidden in a sidebar where it doesn't look important. Remember, the hiring manager needs someone who can implement designs. They have a problem. They have too many designs they need implementing. They have not enough people to do the work. That's why they're hiring. So make sure that when they look at your resume, they see a person who can implement designs, and that is what's going to get you to the first interview. I also recommend that you be smart about it. Think about the type of design you want to get into and isolate just that type of design for that project, so that you don't do wasted work. It's really hard to make games. There's no need to build a whole game from scratch. So for example, do you want to be a level designer? Crack open the Half-Life editor, the source engine tools. Maybe those are a bit old, but find a free level editor online. Make maps for existing games. Half-Life, Half-Life 2 is one example, but you could there are a lot of free tools out there for making levels for existing games. Quake, you can even make a Quake level if you want to. Are you a combat designer? Make a write a new weapon for an existing game where the tools are available, or in Unreal, just do it in the default Unreal project. Are you an AI designer? Unreal, crack open the behavior trees, free Unreal store assets. You don't have to spend time doing things that the hiring manager isn't going to find important. Don't spend your time programming the engine when you're looking for design work. The manager doesn't care about the programming work. They only care about the design stuff. So make sure you're not spinning cycles on that. Okay, cool. Once again, I must ask you, if you've gotten to the end of the video, to press all the buttons. You know what the buttons are. There's the like button, and there's the subscribe button. I think there might be new buttons that I don't even know about. Oh, the comment button, obviously. Press a comment and ask any questions you want to about this. I will answer them in future videos as I have just done. So thank you again. See you next time.